Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Thursday, October 3rd, and we are officially back after a couple weeks away. Some life things, some sicknesses getting in the way, but we're officially back. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jori, how's it been, man? How are things?
It's been good. It's been good. I feel like I owe you a little shout out here for being such a warrior and fighting through to get this episode recorded here. But very nice to finally be back on the mics. It's been a minute or two, but definitely lots to talk about with the Blue Jays now, especially post press conference, which we will get into. And basically, we're post mortem. It's the Blue Jay season is done. We're finally getting the chance to talk. And I mean, listen, the last month was really just kind of a wait to the finish line, but now we get the good stuff.
Yeah. If you don't enjoy, transaction season and some off season, some team building, then turn the pot off right now.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Just kidding. Please keep listening. But no, we are going to get into some postseason stuff. We're going to tap into the news of the day, the news of the week, which was, of course, Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins speaking yesterday morning, giving some insights into the season. Of course, Ross Atkins will be back, and Mark Shapiro did not call Vladimir Guerrero Jr. a generational player. Which news you want to get into first?
I think we should talk about the more important news, which is Mark Shapiro very specifically choosing his words and not the actual thing that matters in terms of the 2025 Toronto Blue Jays, obviously, right? But I mean, listen, I think neither of those is particularly earth shattering. The reaction to the Vlad stuff obviously is, I mean, listen, we kind of talked a little bit beforehand about maybe the importance of him saying that and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's Ross Atkins returning as GM. I think that has much, much larger implications.
Yeah, and I think we saw it coming, right? Like it seems like kind of the feelers were out there that he was going to be back, that John Schneider was going to be back, and of course, some other recent news in Blue Jays land, Guillermo Martinez is fired. Gil Kim is going to be reassigned, it sounds like. Jeff Ware, the assistant pitching coach, the bullpen coach, he was also removed from the major league staff. So, some changes that way. But how surprised are you not to see the heads not rolling?
I would say, based on what we kind of heard in the lead up, it isn't surprising, but there's a certain level of surprise in terms of the patience that this front office seems to have earned. And I'm not sure how much of it is justly so. I mean, I look at a team like the Giants, who are coming off a 100 win season from 2021, and then 22, 23, 24. They are underwhelming at times, and they clean house and put Buster Posey in place. I mean, for the Jays, they've never reached those highs of, I think it was 107 wins. And their postseason success is the same, if not worse. Maybe not worse because the Giants haven't really been relevant in terms of postseason picture much. But it's not like the Jays have either. I mean, the Tigers have won more postseason games than the Blue Jays have since Vlad and Bo entered the big leagues. I get that the small sample nature of postseason baseball just sometimes results in, dumb-ish like the Tigers winning, but over a large sample size, this was a team that was supposed to enter the echelon of the Yankees, of the Dodgers, of the Phillies, and instead they maxed out as a 90-win team and are now floundering without very much in the way of future prospects. And that, to me, is not worthy of giving this group another go. But I don't think I'm alone in that.
No, I think the way that I processed it throughout the year, I figured that they would not let Ross handle a rebuild or a retool. I guess that the fact that it's a retool rather than a rebuild is why he's back, right? Because he's the one that built this core, right? So I guess you let him see it through, I guess is the logic there. You listen to Shapiro talk, and he's not wrong when he's like, talking about how they've made the postseason in 3 of the past 5 years and played important games in September in 4 of those 5 years, right? But at the same time, I mean, when you have the playoff disappointment and then you completely fall off this year, it feels like there was kind of a natural point in time where it makes sense to move on and maybe get a new voice at the head of the front office there. And obviously, they have James Click in the front office. Um, if you're a fan of Farhan Zaidi, like he was out there, he was an option. Of course, Mark Shapiro says that if there was a better option to run the baseball operations department, then he would have made a change. So that means that, maybe he just wasn't impressed by any options out there. But um, I think that just looking at it, like it wouldn't have surprised me if they moved on from him, and like maybe it makes sense too. But I also do understand. I know how frustrating that it is that to watch this team and how this team has been run, which I think is kind of where the disconnect comes in how Mark Shapiro feels about this team versus how the fan base feels about the team. But I think that I do at least kind of understand him looking at the larger body of work and being like, well, they've done well and kind of had this one year, so we'll give him 2025, and if not, then I'm probably gone, and then he'll be gone.
Well, yeah, and I want to read this tweet from Blake Murphy, Sports Sense Blake Murphy on Twitter. Continually defining success as playing meaningful September, not October baseball, is really frustrating, even if the front office truly feels that way due to baseball's grind and playoff randomness. It's terrible PR and speaks to lower aspirations than fans have. And that to me hits the nail on the head as far as where this front office has their sight set and where everybody else in baseball has theirs. And to me, the disconnect, the lack of awareness, the lack of ambition that the front office shows when they specify September baseball instead of October baseball.
Yeah, I mean, this front office is more on the wavelength of Jerry DiPoto saying that the goal is to win 54% of games every year, right? Like the goal isn't to put together, the goal is to get into October and get lucky, right? And I mean, which realistically is kind of what has to happen. You look at the Dodgers, they've only won once in this amazing run. You look at the Braves, they've only won once this amazing run. You look at the Phillies, and they haven't even won with Bryce Harper, right? And so, but you can just kind of see those teams, they're consistently in October because their goals are beyond that, right? Whereas like you look at the Blue Jays and the Mariners, who are probably like, well, we just want to get in and then see if we can go on a run and win it. And they are either making it and getting knocked out early or not even making it at all, right? Like there's kind of the difference between, even you look at like the Rangers and the Diamondbacks, I think, right? Like the Diamondbacks last year are probably built as like that 54% type team, and they make it to the World Series, but it's just not enough because the Rangers had so much more talent, right? Like they'd invested in a World Series team, Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer, right? Like, I mean, sure, you can debate, Jacob deGrom wasn't even on the roster, whatever, but they had invested in those guys and obviously had those larger aspirations. And I think that it's easier to achieve those goals when that's your goal, right? Instead of just getting in and hoping to kind of find your way through October.
Yeah, well, even like again this year, just because it's an easy example to pick on, you look at a team like the Tigers, they are gonna be facing an uphill battle to win 2 additional series against 2 superior teams. That's just the nature of the beast. It is a far preferable situation to be in the Phillies seat, for example, a team that I think in a lot of respects could be not dissimilar from the Blue Jays, given that they're a large market, but not quite in the echelon of the Yankees or the Dodgers. And, you look at the talent that they've got, right? It's not all superstars, and it's guys that are starting to even age out in some respects of being superstars. The Blue Jays, to me, could be modeling themselves after that team, but they're just not. Like Philly is not that dissimilar of a free agent destination in my estimation to Toronto. You look at the Jays being able to court guys like Gosman, guys like Springer, guys like Bassett, and then you look at maybe the Phillies being able to court guys like Schwarber, guys like Castellanos. They're shopping in the same bracket here. So I think, to me, the difference at the end of the day is one of these teams is hunting stars trying to win, and one of these teams is taking consistent chip shots at not mediocrity, but certainly nothing in terms of greatness.
Well, I mean, you had the tweet the other day, right? Where like kind of the guys that they've been, one connected to or two like kind of came up short of. And I think that if you look at like Ross Atkins, um, resume of signing free agents, like it's pretty good, right? Like Kevin Gossman, really good signing. Hyunjin Ryu at the time, solid signing. I know kind of the way that he ages out, it hurts, like not great, but like I mean, he kind of ushered in the new era, right? Springer kind of same boat as Ryu. Like I mean, the first few years, I think it's just kind of a shift in organizational philosophy, being able to land him, right? I know obviously we'll kind of touch on him a little bit later, but and then you look at the other like Jose Barrios, trading for Jose Barrios, a solid deal. You get him extended. Chris Bassett signing, I think that's a fairly solid signing as well. Like they've made good signings, but at the same time, they've missed out on Shohei Ohtani. They've missed out on Jose Ramirez, Francisco Lindor, Kyle Schwarber, Justin Verlander, Corey Seager, Freddie Freeman, Yoshinobu Yamamoto. They've missed out on those guys, and you kind of do have to wonder what's the difference in landing at least one of those players versus why they haven't been able to do that.
Yeah, and that's where the shortfall is, right? You think also in terms of extending the window. Part of extending the window would have been bringing in stars that were going to be part of the team after 2025, 26, when Vlad and Bo are in their free agency years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wonder too. I mean, what it would be your take on them? They miss out on these guys. Does that mean that is that them not willing to go far enough to get these guys, or is it more of a case of guys not wanting to sign with the Blue Jays?
It's impossible to say, but to me, you were able to get Springer, right? So you're able to get stars. So the excuse is not that. I mean, listen, Jose Ramirez, ultimately, it sounds like what happened is they had a deal in place and Ramirez just chose the comforts of Cleveland, which, that is what it is, right? But you think of Lindor, they just weren't willing to pony up to make the deal. You look at, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, for example. I'm sure they could have ponied up to make that deal. Ohtani, they were right there. They just didn't get him. It is what it is, right? I think of maybe Kyle Schwarber. Just pony up. They didn't pony up enough. Like nothing about most of those, by the sounds of it, are a case other than I guess like maybe Ramirez and Ohtani are the player just being like, I'm just more comfortable with another decision. As much as it seems like the Jays could have just put more on the table. And it's not just like a payroll thing, right? There's more to it. But everything you hear about the Jays is the professionalism and the way that they make their players feel accommodated, save for one Rosie D'Amato comment, it seems like they should have been in the mix for these guys. They were in the mix for these guys. They went the distance on dozens of guys and haven't been able to seal the deal.
Yeah, I mean the Freddie Freeman Bayarga graphic with the Flames that said he was signing with the Blue Jays, got to kind of wonder what happened behind the scenes there, right?
Just another case of just missing the boat.
All right, let's touch on the generational thing because I think as far as season-ending press conferences go, I mean, like what else were they going to say? I think about the year rather than it's disappointing and we have to be better, right? Like, I mean, shocker that an executive is going to say that after their team missed the playoffs and had a disappointing season. But the generational thing, I think that you said, like you mentioned, we talked about it in the group a little bit and maybe have a little bit of a differing take about Mark Shapiro not calling Vladimir Guerrero Jr. generational. And I've been thinking about it. And so I think the case of it is this. I think he was right with the words that he said, where he's like, he has the chance to be generational. He's a great offensive player. He defined a generational player to him as like a Hall of Famer, a guy who does it over and over and over and over again, right? Like I think that's generally probably the right take about a generational player, a generational talent. But the more that I've thought about it, yeah, it's like it is kind of weird that you choose being right over being loyal to your players.
Well, that's it, right? Like, is Vlad generational? The answer right now is probably no. You think
Also,
generational
just
across.
quick note, I hate the use of the word
Oh,
generational.
yeah.
It's so overused and awful. Like generational is like a once in a generation talent, right? And realistically, if you're looking at Major League Baseball, how many players are really a once in a generation talent right now? Like
Well,
it's
like
probably like
Otani and Judge,
Otani,
probably.
Judge, and then like Kershaw and DeGrom.
Yeah. Like, I mean, listen, if you want to talk like, because we can expand it across sports here for a sec here. I mean, hockey's got McDavid, Crosby, Ovechkin, maybe Bedard, maybe. Uh, Basketball's got LeBron. Jokic is probably in that discussion.
And
Giannis
then
is probably in that
Wembenyama
discussion.
coming up.
Wemby seems like he'll probably be in that discussion. It seems very likely.
Yeah.
I mean,
Steph probably as well.
Steph probably too. So you got about 5 names there, right? I mean, you look at the NFL, you've got maybe guys like Mahomes. I mean, beyond Mahomes, like maybe Kelsey, but I don't even know if I'd call Kelsey. I mean, how many other generational talents are there? I mean, I think you even have to go kind of back in time to talk generational. It's guys that are kind of bygones at this point almost, right? So
yeah,
you have at most 5, probably more like 4 guys, maybe per league. And then you've got in the case of the NFL, really 1, maybe 2, like maybe Derrick Henry is generational, but like probably not given the state of running backs just as a whole, right? Like there is not a lot in terms of generational talent across sports. You look at baseball, like we just ran them off. Your Mount Rushmore right there is clogged up, and we've named players, or excuse me, we have not named players that are also superior to Vladdy. So Mark Shapiro is not wrong. Vlad right now, as it stands today, clearly not generational, but like you said, it's a layup. It's the easiest thing to say, and it comes back to the same issue as it is with this September versus October baseball. And yeah, PR at the end of the day, it's not meaningless. It's a little more meaningless. It's just words at the end of the day. But you've just got this unbelievable layup, and to just completely let it just not to let it slip away or whatever is such an unforced and in a lot of respects par for the course decision by the front office.
Yeah, it seems just so weird to use your general exec speak in that scenario. I understand they don't want to give him ammunition in a negotiation, but like when you look at it, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. probably has quite a bit of ammunition when it comes to a negotiation anyways.
Well, like here's the thing, look at it from the other side. If Vlad himself came out with a quote, "I can be better," how many millions does that cost him? Does it even cost him $1 million? Does it even cost him $500,000? And in the grand scheme of things, when he's projected in ARB to get 29 or almost 30, it's 2 sides of the same coin, right? Vlad putting himself down is gonna cost just as much, which is maybe a sliver of $1 million, if that, as Shapiro saying yes, he is generational. So that's the only reason that you don't do it, is you're trying to protect your wallet.
Well, I think
no
you read Ben Nicholson-Smith's story from yesterday, and one of the things the leading is the lead in the story is that John Schneider called Vladimir Guerrero Jr. generational at the end of the season. Right. So, and then Ben in the story, he's like, well, did John Schneider cost the Blue Jays millions of dollars by saying that? Probably not.
No.
So does it make a difference if, what's the difference between Mark Shapiro and John Schneider saying it?
It's to me, I could only imagine that it's just leverage in terms of, oh, you think I'm generational? I can squeeze a couple more dollars out of you in a long-term extension.
Yeah.
Which if he has any intentions of being a Blue Jay, like, I mean, think of how much either way a statement like that is going to swing the ultimate price tag, right? It's not. Yeah. It's barely going to.
Here's what I'll say about Vlad, and we're going to get into it a bit later, but Is he a generational Blue Jay? I will say yes to that.
100%,
Yes.
easily.
Yeah.
Like he's not level of excellence yet, but he's probably a couple of seasons away from level of excellence.
Yeah.
Maybe
Especially if he
one or
signs
two.
the extension. Like I think he'll be up there for sure.
100%.
All right, well, let's move on. We are going to do the 7 most important stories of the Blue Jay season. Last year, our season recap episode was grading every player that suited up for the Blue Jays. We're not going to do that this year because they had
We
56
could. You
players.
just might be listening to a 4-hour podcast.
They had 56 players this year, and I don't think that giving grades to the likes of Nick Robertson and Brett DeGuss and Mitch White and Brandon Eisert and Wes Parsons and Yuri Rodriguez and name the million of relievers that they had on the team this year is really worth anybody's time. So we're going to dive into what we think are the most important stories of the year, in no particular order. But let's start off with, maybe one that quietly had perhaps the biggest impact on this year's team, and I think that's the bullpen and the bullpen's demise.
Yeah, the bullpen was like the worst. Was it the worst in baseball statistically?
They
I
had the
feel like it was.
29th ERA in baseball, and you could
Yeah,
guess who was worse.
yeah. Like
And
it
it's a
doesn't
team
take away from.
playing way up there.
Oh yeah, like the the bullpen to me is a very interesting point of discussion in the terms of like you've got these talented guys coming into the year. I remember saying on multiple occasions on the record that I thought the Jays were going to have a top 5, top 10 bullpen. You look at coming into the year, think of your perception of these guys before the year. Romano, Swanson, Meza, Garcia. You had oh god, like I'm forgetting names, but it was a cacophony of talent, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, basically the entire back end of their bullpen just completely implodes and ends up irrelevant by the end of the year, right? I mean, you're trotting out Zach Pop at the end of the year as your highest leverage reliever.
Yeah, the fact that Zach Pop got into 59 games for this team is an indictment on how things ended up going for the bullpen.
Yeah, and so here's kind of where it's at: is it's a double-edged sword, right? You can't rebuild the back of a top 10 bullpen overnight. That's just not how it works. But something that this front office did fail to do is accumulate pitching depth in the upper minors, particularly young pitching depth at the upper minor levels. They didn't have that type of talent on the horizon, so that when there were injuries, they were able to plug holes with guys that actually were going to make impacts. There's Ricky Tiedemann, but he was hurt. Beyond him, the pitching depth of the upper minors was almost non-existent. So to me, there's 2 parts to that discussion. The first part is the failure to adjust quickly, but the other part is the failure to prepare.
Yeah, and I believe it was John Schneider that said that he estimates that the bullpen performance this year probably cost them about 10 wins, and that's here or there depending on how you want to debate that. I think the Blue Jays relievers combined for like -3 F-WAR or something like that, right? But still, like, I mean, I'm just gonna rhyme off some of the numbers here from the Blue Jays bullpen in 2023 versus 2024. And so in 2023, they had a 3.68 ERA. This year, they had a 4.82. Their strikeout rate fell from 26% to 20.7%. Their home runs per 9 went from 1.15 to 1.46. Their FIP went from 3.99 to 4.39. Sierra went from 3.65 to 4.14. You look at some of the other things, like, I mean, they allowed almost a full percentage, or sorry, more than a full percentage of barrel rate. The hard hit rate went up. Basically any number you look at, and it was significantly worse in 2024. So I
Yeah,
think
everything trended in the wrong direction.
yeah. So as far as like, it, we're talking like most important stories of the Blue Jays season. And I don't necessarily know how you put a number on how many games that they blew, but when you look at kind of what went into the Blue Jays bullpen being bad. And of course, it's the underperformance of guys like Eric Swanson early and Tim Meza ending up being a DFA candidate. Trevor Richards ending up getting traded, and he wasn't that good. Jordan Romano missing most of the year. Zach Pop being one of your top relievers. Chad Green kind of imploding towards the end of the season, right? Like there's just so much that went into this bullpen not being good. And you're right, where they just didn't have the pieces to account for that happening.
Yeah, I don't think that 10-win swing is that egregious. Obviously, you're talking about what you said was a -3 F4, but like last year's bullpen, I would bet was probably worth 5 or 6 wins. There's your 10-win swing right there, right? So it's not. I just, to me, like your bullpen being so egregiously bad, it's the bullpen. It's the small sample size of small sample size in a sport that dumb stuff happens when there's small sample sizes involved. But you can still build a better bullpen than the 29th in baseball, right?
Yeah. I mean, so here's the numbers. The F4 2023 bullpen 4.6, F4 2024 bullpen -2.6.
Yeah, there's your swing right there. Is this 10 wins? Maybe, maybe not, but like it's like 6, 7 wins.
Yeah, which is really important, right? Like I mean, 6, 7 wins, that takes them from a 74 win team to an 81 win team, right? And then from there, obviously there were a lot more issues with this team than the bullpen, but the bullpen I think is probably the biggest factor in the way that they performed, right? And if the bullpen's better early in the season, they probably aren't sellers at the trade deadline, which again impacts the last few weeks of the season where they were just pretty much unwatchable against the Rays, Red Sox, and Marlins. I mean, you get swept by 100 loss team to end the year. It's just pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's keep moving on through this. Another thing I think maybe not major league relevant storyline, but kind of an organization-wide storyline, and is kind of the pitching injuries that plagued the Blue Jays from top to bottom, and that's Jordan Romano being shut down for the year, Alek Manoah getting Tommy John, Ricky Tiedemann not being able to continue his progress, Landon Morotis, Brandon Barriera. I'm obviously going to miss some guys because there were so many arm injuries in the system this year, and even of course that did impact the major league roster a little bit as well. It's just one of those things, and we've seen them kind of start to try and address that, right? Like there's been a lot of player development staff that have been let go in the past couple of weeks, including pitching coordinator Corey Popham. He's kind of the headliner name that's been released from the development system, and I think that the pitching injuries are probably a huge part of that.
Yeah, the pitching injuries, listen, again, pitching injuries are they happen. That's just the nature of baseball. Guys' arms are exploding at an incredible rate these days. So if you want to call that bad luck, if you want to call that bad development, I don't know if I have a correct answer for you. But in terms of, again, you want to talk about those upper minors and the lack of pitching depth, it all came crashing down this year from top to bottom.
Yeah, I think I'm really sorry if whoever said this or whoever wrote this is listening, because I can't remember where I saw it, but somebody had said that the Blue Jays front office thinks that they were chasing stuff a little bit too much in the minor leagues, which is like part of what contributed to the pitching injuries.
Which is probably true, right? Like this is not a surprise that in a sport that by and large these days is all about stuff and all about the ability to blow guys away or make your stuff spin like crazy amounts, right? Of course, guys' arms are imploding, but also you're trying to get these guys ready for the major league level, right? And I think it was you'd mentioned this. I don't know if you mentioned it on Twitter or if it was on the podcast that you think about like stuff plus in the minor leagues. I think in AAA is like in the 80s or 90s, and then obviously at the major league level, it's much better than that. And it speaks to obviously, guys in the context you used it. It was, I think, was around Jackson Holiday and his struggles acclimate in major league pitching, but it's kind of like it's the same discussion where it's if a guy's going to be good enough, he's got to be better than all these guys in the minor leagues. And that AAA number was again like in the 90s. They've got to be a better guy in terms of their ability to spin the ball, their ability to throw the ball hard, to do stuff with the baseball. So, like, listen, chasing stuff is going to result in these injuries, but I don't know what the alternative solution to that is.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at like how some of the Blue Jays starters succeed, right? Like Chris Bassett, he's isn't stuffed up. He's, maybe one of the least stuffed up guys on the Blue Jays staff.
Well, their whole rotation,
yeah,
him and
I
Barrios
mean,
are the same.
outside of Gossman, right? Like Bowden Francis, he's not a stuff monster. Kevin Gossman this year, like, I mean, he kind of took a step more towards being like like a pitchability guy almost this season, right? And so, you kind of look like obviously there's room for those guys to succeed. The Blue Jays have a handful of them, but it is kind of one of those things where teams across baseball are chasing that stuff. And obviously it's just maybe one of those things for the Blue Jays this year where it's just unlucky that all these injuries came together at the same time.
Yeah. So what do you do?
Well, apparently you fire a bunch of your player development staff and change some of your philosophies.
I just don't know what else you could have done.
Yeah, I mean,
you've got to develop the guys like this.
Would you prefer, like, for you as a follower of the Blue Jays, do you think it's better that they change their philosophy to look a little bit more at pitchability than stuff, or would you rather them continue to hunt stuff?
Well, if you're gonna have your best pitching prospects blow up their arms over and over again, then you can't be chasing stuff, right? Yeah. There's obviously a scale, there's a slider here in terms of how stuffy you want your guys to be versus if you want them healthy. And a lot of teams obviously have the slider way over to the stuff, but I don't know if that's necessarily something that the Jays are going to be able to do based on their current pitching core in the minor leagues. Obviously, this is not a pitching core that is particularly, I guess, bulky or able to withstand the rigors of that. They're not a bunch of workhorses. So maybe you do have to work around more kind of pitchability. I just don't really know what your answer is there, but it's 100% one of the storylines of the season.
Yeah, I think it's sorry, I'll just go one more point before we move on here. I would be curious to know like what the difference is in pushing guys for stuff, right? Like you're trying to build up stuff versus like a Paul Skeens who just has the stuff, right?
But Paul
like
Skeens is a unicorn. I mean,
but because he just has the stuff, right? Like, so like a Ricky Tiedemann, like he obviously another guy who just like purely has the stuff. Like, were they pushing him for more stuff, or are they trying to, kind of work that pitchability, or is it kind of like they're trying to push the envelope, right? Like, I don't think that the Pirates were like, hey, Paul Skeens, let's see how much more we can get your fastball to ride. Or if they were like, hey, you're throwing 102 with a disgusting splitter, sprinkler, whatever, like we're just going to let you be.
Yeah, it's probably the latter more than the former.
Yeah. All right, let's keep moving on. I think a nice transition here. Bowden Francis, a exceptional second half. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball following the trade deadline. Entering the Blue Jays rotation, he ends the year with a 3.30 ERA, a 4.36 FIP. But that ERA is extremely bloated by what happened to him at the beginning of the year, where he, had 2 starts, got blown up in both of them, and then was moved to the bullpen, and then was sent down to the minors, and then came back as a starter, added the splitter, and just one of the most devastating strike throwers in baseball in the second half.
Yeah, he was excellent. I'm just going to pull up his baseball reference here, see if I can grab a look at his second half stats, because that's really kind of where his bread and butter. I mean, again, that 3.30 ERA, like you said, a little bit bloated.
Yeah, so I mean, as you're pulling it up, I sent this in our chat, but I was listening back to our season preview pod, and we were one of the things that we did, this or that or whatever over under, and one thing that we tried to do was project Bowden Francis's ERA on the year. And you said that he would be a 3.7 to a 3.9, and I said that he would be a 4.2. So the fact that he ends the year with a 3.3 over so many innings is really just impressive,
and totally exceeds expectations in that too, right? Like here's the here's the numbers, right? It's July. He's in the bullpen and he's having some difficulty. He's got a 6.75 ERA, but like here's his August numbers. He had 34 innings. It was 5 starts. He had a 1.05 ERA and struck out 10.2 guys per nine, and obviously had a number of perfect game bids, or no hit bids. And then in September and October, he has a 2.16 ERA in 25 innings, 4 starts. And the K's come down only 6.1, but again, just an incredible August, September that this guy basically has now turned into being probably in the Jays rotation next year.
Yeah, I think he's locked in. I don't know how you can kind of look at what he did in the second half and think otherwise. He was, is he going to be a 1.8 ERA over a longer sample size? I mean, maybe not. I think that would maybe be expecting a little bit much out of him, but at the same time, I mean, you know what, he clearly figured something out, and he was able to do that through, I think, like basically every single start. Like you mentioned, the no hit bids, like he didn't give up hits realistically in the second half. Like he gave up very few hits as this, and of course, some of that is luck for a non-strikeout pitcher. But at the same time, I think just the development of him being like one of the stories of the season is really cool. And I think you can look at it as, for us talking about it here today, versus like an important versus a cool story, but I think him emerging as a reliable rotation piece is really important for the 2025 Blue Jays.
So here's something I think should be noted, right? I look at a guy like, there's not a lot of similarities in terms of their pitchability styles, but I think of a guy like Justin Steele, and the year that he broke out, a lot of it was kind of unsustainable. It kind of looked a little iffy, but he was able to build on that success that he'd had in, I think it was 2022. And he turned that into a really successful 2023, if I recall correctly. And then obviously 2024, he also was good, dealt with some injuries, but has turned himself into really the ace of the Cubs staff. Bowden Francis is not going to be the ace of the Blue Jays staff, basically, under any circumstances, even though, Chris Bassett said so at the beginning of the season. But if he can build on this and turn this stretch of 2 really exceptional months into being a 3 or a 4, that's found money. That's beautiful.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
that's doable, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, so let's enter this hypothetical world for a second. Let's say that the 2024 Blue Jays were entering the playoffs after their second half. Would you have given Bowden Francis the ball in game 1 of a
Would you
playoff
not
series?
have? I mean, like, you're probably giving it to Gosman because he also had a really good second half. But Bowden Francis, to me, gets game 2.
Yeah, I might give him game 1. I don't know. Like, I mean, even Barrios had a really great second half too, right? So I mean,
Yeah,
like,
but then
kind
of course
had,
it fell apart right at the end.
yeah. I just want to look at like where Bowden Francis ranked in baseball. So he was the second best pitcher by ERA in the second half, only behind Blake Snell. He had a 1.8. Of course, that doesn't, he's not going to rank very highly in strikeouts or kind of anything like that because he doesn't do that. But I mean, you look, he had a 0.60 whip.
Yeah, like that's
in the
not
second
gonna
half.
last.
Well, the thing was that he just threw the ball in the strike zone. Like he was filling it up and just realistically, like it's funny when you look at guys who just throw strikes, right? I think kind of you look at he had the 5th highest zone percentage of any pitcher in the second half, right?
Well, who are some of the other guys in that list?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to read these, and you're not going to be super encouraged. Like number 1 was Jamison Tyon, number 2 Brian Wu, number 3 Joey Estes from the A's, number 4 Austin Gomber from Colorado. But then you kind of get into like, I mean, also in the top 10 are Nathan Eovaldi, Tarek Skubal, Shane Baz, right?
I don't know. I think there are some nice names in there. Even Brian Wu to me is a nice name.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Wu is he's just going to throw his fastball, so he's like,
it's a little different.
Yeah. But no, I think it's really encouraging just to see like the way that Bowden Francis kind of figured out that all he wants to do is throw strikes. That he's going to throw. I mean, he's throwing his fastball for strikes. He's throwing his splitter for strikes, right? He was a little bit different than Gausman, where he was throwing his fastball his splitter in the zone to not get whiffs, but to get outs. Whereas Gausman's throwing it to get swing and miss, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, really interesting development for sure. And of course, he's has this quote where he's, trust your stuff or trust your
And let it ride.
your poop and let it eat kind of thing. So, yeah, I think just a really cool development and kind of excited to see what he how he starts next year.
Do you think that he can be a 3 or 4? Like, how does he change the complexion to you of adding to the rotation? Because to me, I thought that, coming into the second half of the year, maybe in like August, that the Jays were likely going to have to go out and probably add a rotation arm. Do they even need to do that at this point? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably depends on what you think of Yariel.
Because he's also probably a rotation piece, maybe. But I mean, you're kind of getting a little crammed in there. You've kind of already got 5 guys.
Sorry, yes. I mean, they also have Jake Bloss too, right? Who could be in the mix. I think like probably adding a guy wouldn't hurt. A guy who can maybe swing between the rotation and bullpen, or maybe be like even a little bit of AAA depth. I think it probably wouldn't hurt. I think Bowden gives you like that 3-4, but that 5 spot is going to be what you got to address.
Yeah, and that to me is something that ideally you're looking at a guy like a Jake Bloss, and you're able to use him in that role, or I guess like Yariel Rodriguez is similar in that capacity, although obviously we've seen a lot more from him than we have from Jake Bloss, right? So I mean, I guess we'll see what exactly they choose to do this winter. It's not where they're going to divert their resources. It's going to be the hitting and it's going to be the bullpen, but it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, they'll yeah, like I mean, I think the rotation will be fine. And unless they want to go out and add like Blake Snell or somebody big, I don't think that we're going to be seeing like a major rotation addition.
Yeah, exactly. Blake Snell, by the way, he's going to get paid, right? Like,
Yeah,
it didn't happen last year. This year, surely someone will pay him.
yeah. I think his thing, like where he said that he didn't realize the value of spring training, so he had to really slow start. And he was the best pitcher in baseball in the second half. Bowden Francis might have been the best pitcher in the American League, but Blake Snell was absolutely ridiculous. And I think that he kind of proved that his Cy Young season, which some people kind of questioned, was no fluke, and he's going to be maybe like the highest paid pitcher on the market. It's
100%. Yeah, I
depending
don't
on
know
how you
who
feel
else
about
is
Corbin
gonna
Burns.
be. Yeah, I don't know who else is going to be in that echelon. Even Burns had a really tough kind of stretch to end the year, right? Like he's still Corbin Burns, but I guess we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah.
We're getting off topic.
Let's move on to some hitting stuff. We've touched a little bit on pitching here, so let's move on to the hitting, where I think these stories are significantly probably more negative than a Bowden Francis. I guess the two of the 3 stories we've done so far have been negative, but it was that kind of season. So let's start with Bo Bichette. We weren't able to record after he came back, and then
Aaron Rodgers himself.
yes, he has a pin in his finger now after fracturing his finger, and just an awful year all around for Bo. There was not really anything good about it. He hit 4 home runs. He hit 225, 71 WRC plus, and just wasn't able to be the Bo Bichette that we know.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I'm going to say. It's been the Chris Bryantification of Bo Bichette this last year. And now he heads into the final year of his arbitration years. And we'll see who he is next year. I mean, he's going to be part of the team next year, one would figure, because the trade package for him, if they do move him, is going to be substantially underwhelming. So it's hard to envision a universe where he does ultimately get dealt. But he is going to have a huge bounce back if he wants to be an important part of this team and if he wants to get paid.
Yeah, I think when we recorded our, what's up with Bo Bichette episode, and you looked at the StatCast numbers, and they were all fairly similar to what they were in the past. But from there, he just went on a huge slump, right? Like the hard hit rate was way down, the barrel rate was way down. Almost all the expected stats took a huge drop off in 2024. So he's got a lot to prove next year, and that's from a process standpoint, and that's from a results standpoint.
Yeah, and I think that there's reason to believe he can, get back to it because he's still Bo Bichette. But my goodness, 4 home runs especially is really concerning to me. The complete inability to really do damage. I know that was kind of the dirty word this year around the Blue Jays, but like to me, it's really just a matter of you need Bo to be Bo if you want to be successful, and Bo was just anything but this year.
Yeah, we talk about the bullpen costing them around 5 to 6 wins, but I think Bo Bichette being one out for so much time and two bad when he was on the field, that probably cost you like 5 wins in itself, right? Like, I mean, obviously you look at the WAR numbers and he's like a 4-ish win player, 4 or 5 win player. Unless you're talking about his 2021, then he's like a 6, 7 win player. But I think that realistically his impact does cost them 5, 6 wins outside of the numbers.
Yeah, and it's really just a question of can he get back to being the best version of himself next year. I mean, he dealt with leg injuries all year. He dealt with leg injuries at the end of last year, and he saw his production plummet. And now, I mean, he's got this finger injury. Is it going to be lingering? Probably not. I mean, this isn't the kind of stuff that tends to linger, but it still doesn't help that he's, battling a new thing. So, like, we'll see exactly what happens. You need his legs to be better. I mean, I think of how he, was stealing bases and stopped doing so as the bases got bigger. Is that something he'll be able to bring back to his game? Because it was something that was particularly valuable that he brought to his game that was unique in terms of the skill set that the Blue Jays had at the time. So I'm just wondering, will the real Bo Bichette return?
Yeah, and you have to imagine that, contract year, I feel like probably going to get a pretty good Bo Bichette. I would imagine. And, I think baseball's impossible to predict, right? Like, I mean, I think at this time last year, we were saying Bo Bichette is the Blue Jays MVP and that they need to extend him and all this stuff, right? And it's funny how things can kind of change in a year, but
I mean, we were saying the same thing about Vladdy in terms of just the opposite, in terms of is he
exactly.
even a part of this core? And now you have to extend him, which I mean, we'll get into that.
Yeah, I think one thing too with Bo, like the defense again also kind of dropped off as well from 2023 where he took a step forward. Like he had a 5 DRS in 2023, and then this year he had a -3 in 680 innings instead of almost 1200, right? So just kind of all across the board, things were really tough for Bo.
Yes, he really went Chris Bryant mode this year, which is not something that you want to be hearing unless you're talking about the 2016 World Series.
Yeah, when do we get the Rookie of the Year MVP years if he's Chris Bryant?
Yeah, I know, right? Oh,
Okay, let's keep moving on here. Another disappointing offensive story this year is George Springer, and let me ask you this: is George Springer cooked?
like what do you do? Like literally, what do you do with him? I mean, is he cooked? Probably. He's what 34 years old. He briefly came on during the second half. Might have not even been the second half. Might have literally just been like in June. Is this guy like a fourth outfielder now? That's a lot of money to pay a fourth outfielder. Are you gonna just like trade him back to the Astros and hope that they're kind of trying to get the band back together? And it's just you eat the money. He's got what 2 years left after this one, if I recall correctly. He signs in 21. He's 21, or excuse me, signs for 20. Hold on.
He's got 25 and 26 left.
Yeah, so he has 2 years left. Like, hopefully he's healthy, but like, oh boy, this is not great.
Yeah, I mean, for him to, I guess he's still hit 19 home runs, which is fine. But considering the 220, 303, 371 slash line with the 95 WRC plus, like, I mean, man, that's a tough
Well, like
tough line.
you're not expecting him to age like this poorly. Like it's incredible that he's aged so poorly. Uh, I I think that what he's what is he 34? Like he's not even really in the declining stage yet. There's a lot of productive
He
baseball
just
players in
turned
the
35.
yeah, like there's a lot of productive guys in their age 34 seasons. And George Springer at his peak was incredibly talented. So to dramatically fall off like this is how could you possibly have seen this coming? But also, like, wow, does it cause them some problems?
Yeah, it really does. And I think that's why it's so important, right? Like, I mean, you even look, it's kind of funny, his barrel rate was actually up this year from last year, but his hard hit rate was down. Again, all the expected numbers down as well. His max EV, last year's max EV was almost 116, and this year it was 110.
Like he's lost it. He doesn't have it anymore.
Yeah.
But are you just needing that money? Like, can you trade him somewhere and someone will use him as a fourth outfielder? Like defensively, he's still not that bad. He still has some value, but it's as a corner outfielder. So what do you do?
I
Just don't
think
know.
I think it's probably one of those things where you run him out again for next year because I don't think that anybody's taking on a $25 million 95 WRC plus
But he's
outfielder.
taking at bats away from guys like Addison Barger, from guys like Joey Loperfido, like guys with upside.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, I mean, for next year, are Addison Barger and Joey Loperfido going to be significantly better than George Springer?
Yes, I would
You
actually
think
say
so?
yes. I 100% would. Well, listen, if you're a betting man, who of that group of three guys, who's the most likely to have a 750 or higher OPS? Who's the least likely to have a 700 or higher OPS? I would say that the most likely is one of the other two to be above a 750, and Springer will almost certainly be sub 700.
I mean, when like Addison Barger had a 70 WRC plus and Loperfido had a 61 in their time with the Blue Jays this year.
I don't think it really matters. I think that it's still there's still so much younger, so much more untapped upside in those guys that absolutely one of those two could be a productive hitter.
Yeah, I think that they definitely could be. I think that they still have a lot to go, but like I just don't know. I think it might be one of those scenarios like, I saw somebody say, sorry, I saw somebody say, could we see like a Jose Abreu scenario with George Springer next year?
Is it is it completely unfathomable? I don't think so.
No, I think probably for a guy like that, well, I mean, you say that and the Astros did it with Jose Abreu, but I feel like George Springer is like it'd be really tough to do that to George Springer.
Yeah. Well, I don't think if the Jays struggle next year, if they're really having a tough go of it, I mean, the
Yeah,
Astros did it and proceeded to make the postseason. I mean,
yeah,
it didn't
that's
go
fair.
so well,
Yeah,
but they turned it around, right? It was a mishmash of guys that ultimately ended up replacing him. But like, if you've got better alternative options, like, do you want to eat 50 something $1 million? Probably not. But like, what choice do you have?
yeah. I don't even know. Like, there's just not really an easy answer. There's not a comfortable answer. There's not a you can't pull the parachute and get out of it. Like you're in it, and you're gonna have to figure out a way to deal with it. And I think maybe you give them another year and see before you kind of have that serious conversation about it being like, hey, we got to move you to the bench, or we got to figure out a way to get your money off or something like that. And you know, like how much time? What's his rope look like next year?
Yeah, I can't imagine it's fun. And it's tough too, because of all the guys on the Jays, he's comfortably one of the most likable players on the team too. Like chose the Blue Jays, extremely bright personality, extremely likable. And to just have his skill set decline like this is just disheartening to say the least, right? I mean, the hope was that it would be, him, Bo Vlad would be the core, and it just did not happen.
Yeah, I think his fall off and Bo's fall off are like 20% of why this season went so wrong,
Yeah, maybe
maybe
more.
more. Yeah, like it's crazy just how important your stars giving you consistent star level play is.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to the guy who did give them consistent star level play. And I would argue probably the most important story of the Blue Jays season, and that is Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
Yes, and the most important story of their offseason, because this guy needs an extension, and the Blue Jays should be all over it.
Yeah, we talked about it, right? Like, I mean, again, like a generational talent in the organization, a guy who has a chance to be generational and showed it again this year. He'll be probably a top five, maybe like MVP finisher this year, and
He'll
like just
finish in that range. He'll finish in that.
yeah,
I want to know. I mean, can they get him extended? In your estimation, do you think it's gonna happen? Do you think it can happen? Because to me, it should be October is spent watching postseason baseball. The final pitch of the World Series is thrown on, we'll say Halloween or maybe slightly thereafter. We'll say Jake Rogers catches a riding fastball
Jackson Job.
from Jackson Job coming in to close it, as the Dodgers once again losing the World Series to the Tigers and their merry band of friends. And the following day, there should be, maybe not pen to paper, but there should be about 600 voicemails on Vlad's answering machine, to the extent of, hey, how's this? Hey, how's this? Hey, how's this?
Yeah, I think they've got to get it done this offseason, right? Like, I mean, I don't know whether he'd be the type that'd be like, once the season starts, I don't want to negotiate, but I think he's the type where, like, just get it done. Don't let him enter the season with the free agency on the
Can you
horizon.
imagine the distractions that would cause? Like, already they're trying to fix a broken team, and to have that on top and come to spring training and the first questions to Vlad be, so what's the contract? So what's the contract? Just imagine the chaos that's going to cause.
Yeah, I mean, last year they took him to an arbitration hearing, and like realistically, I just think, you know, one, if you don't negotiate like a long-term deal with him, then you got to negotiate like an ARB deal with him. And I don't think you want to take him to ARB twice in 2 years kind of thing.
It's
So
going to cost any chance you've got of basically signing him.
yeah, so I think the way that I look at it, like, I mean, yeah, you're right. Like they've got to get it done, I think, in 2024. Like don't try and get this deal done in January. Don't try and get it done in February. Get it done in November. Get it done in October. Even if you know what, like steal the limelight from the playoffs. Extend him during the playoffs. Like steal the headlines. Give him 400 million. Maybe not 400 million. That's a lot of money, but yeah, I think he's earned it. This year was incredible. I think just so impressive the way that he kind of came into, you know, the results on the field were really good, but I think it seemed like he matured a little bit during the year too. He kind of like leaned into the leadership role. He, you know, took ownership of the team, I think, and he was the guy, right? Like he didn't have any protection in the lineup. He was the sole focus for every other team, and he still put up this season like that while being that presence in the clubhouse. And I think that's just a guy that you like overpay him, right? Like don't worry about getting value, just get him signed up and get
Adjust.
him.
You can adjust around Vladdy. There are guys that you can't adjust around. You know, you give Springer a lot of money. It was a good choice at the time, not now, but it's tough to adjust around him. If you pay Vladdy, you will be able to adjust around him. You will be able to maneuver around him, because it's Vladimir Guerrero Jr. That is your number 2, number 3 hitter in the lineup, penciled in for the next decade.
And you know what? If you're the front office, look at it this way. When that contract is up, you're probably not going to have a job in Toronto.
Probably.
So you never know the way things are though.
Yeah. Now, here's the question is, does Ross Atkins get the thumbs up from ownership to even spend that money?
Well, I think it was Blair and Barker who were talking about it yesterday, that they think that ownership is going to have to step in to get Vladdy signed. And I don't really know how to speculate on stuff like that, because, you know, I don't know Mark Shapiro. I don't know Ross Atkins. I don't know Edward Rogers. But I think it's interesting that that was a take that was thrown out there, that the front office maybe seems disenchanted with Vladdy as a long-term piece.
I just don't know if that's something that, like, if you got to step in to sign your best player, what does that say about your front office right now?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of weird to think about realistically.
Yeah. Now here's a crazy question. What happens when November 7th rolls around and a Jeff Passan tweet going the Jays and the front office and Vlad are having trouble coming to terms on a deal and it sounds like he's on the market?
I don't think we'll be getting that tweet.
No, you don't think so?
I think that like what one thing Ross said in his press conference yesterday is that they're committed to this core. So I think that they, one thing he also said too is that like even if we don't sign these guys, we don't have to trade them. So yeah, I think that it would be very unfortunate if they rode into free agency with both of those guys unsigned next year. I think that'd be very unfortunate if they lost them both without getting some sort of value in return. But I think that maybe they really want to shoot their shot in 2025. And if they don't get the extensions done, then I think that maybe they'll ride those guys out to the deadline. If they're playing well, they'll keep them. And then if they're not playing well, then they'll deal them at the deadline.
I know I've gone heavy on the cross sports references this episode, but boy, this feels a lot like the Raptors.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's an area of where like at least Vlad and Bo are like 25, 26, right? I think that's a huge win for them. And that if you give them big deals, that there's a lot of room for them to be really great. Whereas the Raptors guys, it kind of feels like if you gave them like those max extensions, that you would probably be getting some not great years from them. And even then, I think that Vlad and Bo are probably more impactful championship level players than Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet as like the bases of your franchise.
Yeah, that's probably a fair assumption, but it still feels like they're a bit paralyzed with a decision.
Yes, for sure. I mean, one thing I do want to talk about Vladdy's year. I mean, like we talked about how impressive it was, and obviously he's going to get MVP votes. But is there kind of like any moment that stood out to you about his year and anything like specifically that makes you believe that 2024 is more real than say 2023?
I just think of the whole just incredible stretch coming out of the All-Star break. I think of every day it felt like he was going to be getting on base. It felt like every at bat he was going to do damage. I don't know if I have one particular moment just off the dome, but I just think of that summer, just in the middle of just what was just a dreadful, dreadful stretch, and the Jays are getting ready to sell off, and it sounds like everything's going on, it goes sideways, and they briefly flirt with 500, but that doesn't really end up happening. Just it was not a fun year in the summer. Everyone was kind of like it's a bit of a death march to the deadline, and every game Vlad was going out there and you'd see another stat where he's got 1,600 OPS since the All-Star break, got 1,500 OPS. He's been the best hitter in baseball. He's been the best hitter in it was just remarkable to see.
Yeah, he was really incredible. I mean, he wins the Player of the Month award. Like I mean, you kind of look like you want to talk like WRC plus. I mean, in July he had a 203 and in August he had a 215. So just an amazing year, realistically.
Incredibly good.
Yeah, and he really did establish himself, I think, as that franchise corner piece.
Well, do you
Cornerstone.
have like something? Do you have something that comes to mind when you think of kind of the best way to
No, I think
summarize
it's
Vlad's season?
yeah, I think it's just the maturity. I like I mean, I know that that's like subjective a little bit. But I think just kind of like the presence that he had this year was a little bit different than in years past. And I think that that's kind of whether that's in the box, off the field, like it just felt like he kind of had things completely straight set for him this year. And it seems like the last couple of years he maybe didn't have that.
Yeah, I gotta say it's almost crazy to say this, but I remember back in like April we're talking about this guy's is he cooked, and then even after that we're calling him Vladdy Arias, and we're like, is this a better version of Vlad? I don't even know. And then for the way that things obviously ultimately unfold, um,
Yeah.
nice to have that Vladdy back.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And one I was on the radio like not so long ago and they asked, is this Vladdy's best season? And I mean, the answer is probably no, because what he did in 2021 was just ridiculous. But I think at the same time, it might be almost a little more impressive because he didn't have the protection in the lineup. He could have just packed it in, whatever. But I think just that without the way that things went for the Blue Jays this year, and for him to kind of emerge as that spotlight and the most important story of the season for them, I think was really cool, and maybe kind of gives it a little bit of again, like his most impressive season maybe.
I think it probably, in terms of maybe just on the raw numbers, there's always that, is it greatest, best, there's a lot of juggling of variables. It might not be statistically his best season, but in terms of just purely what he was able to accomplish, I would absolutely describe this as a better season than the 2021 season.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to our last storyline, and it is that the Blue Jays were forced to sell. Of course, I feel like them selling at the trade deadline is maybe just representative of what the season was, right? Like, I mean, of course, we're talking most important stories of the season, and the story of the season is that they were bad. And that led to them trading at the trade, or selling at the trade deadline, where they dealt away Yusei Kikuchi, Trevor Richards, Jimmy Garcia, Justin Turner, Kevin Kiermaier, Nate Pearson, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. Am I missing anybody?
You're forgetting a few, but I mean, I don't know if I can. There was 8 trades, I think it was. Like, they really just like cleaned house, and I mean, it was a team that had a lot of kind of weapons, but had a lot of options to move off of.
Danny
And
Jansen. How could I forget Danny
Jansen?
Jansen?
They went full, balls to the wall. Everybody must go, and that's what they should have done. That's what they did, and it was the right decision.
Yeah, I mean, and when you look at it, Yusei Kikuchi and Justin Turner were the only two that really went on to play significantly well for their new teams. I know Danny Jansen really struggled. Jimmy Garcia was okay, and then ended up getting hurt and had to go on the 60-day IL. Isaiah IKF wasn't great for the Pirates, so shocker to see that one coming. That he
That's
might
tough
not
too.
have been.
I was pretty upset in relative terms that they chose to deal him. So I'm surprised. I mean, I shouldn't be, but I'm surprised the way that he struggled.
Yeah. And then kind of hand in hand with that as a storyline is that it restocked the farm a little bit with the likes of Jake Bloss and Will Wagner and RJ Schreck and Charles McAdoo and kind of all these guys coming in. But I think as far as like importance to the season, like I just think that the trade deadline shows just how poorly things went. I think if you told us at the beginning of the year that they would be trading Yusei Kikuchi and Danny Jansen and Justin Turner and IKF and like the guys that they signed, and that Nate Pearson would be a Chicago Cub, like I don't know if I would have necessarily believed you.
Yeah, it's season defining, 100%. There's no other way to really put it. And it was, like I said, the right decision. And I do think that a lot of the guys that they ended up walking away with at the end of it, it's substantially helped, clear the picture a little bit in terms of what they've got moving forward. I think of a guy like RJ Schreck, who they kind of just plucked, and almost by pure luck, he turns out to actually be like a really impactful, really good piece at the AA level. And it seems like he might be a major league piece. And you look at guys like Jake Bloss, obviously had the pedigree coming in, maybe struggled a little bit more, but still add some pedigree to the Jays farm. With that same trade, you've got a similar story with Loperfido. I mean, Will Wagner turns out to be just a revelation for the Blue Jays. Like, it was so necessary that this team added an infusion of talent to the minor league system. And when they sucked this year, it was a great excuse to go ahead and do that. So, like, is it good that they traded everyone away? Is it good that they were losing ball games? No, obviously not. But at the end of the day, and we talked about it at the time of the deadline, it's extremely important because for 2025, it A, gives you assets to move if you need to go out and get somebody, and B, it helps you beyond 2025.
Yeah, I think the group, like, I mean, they didn't all perform extremely well in the minor leagues, but of course, it's really tough to move organizations for the first time in your career. And I think it's really cool that we did get to see Will Wagner and Joey Loperfido and Jonathan Clase all play at the major league level too, which is, nice to kind of see some of those guys have some success, have some failure, have kind of get their feet wet in the major leagues for after you do trade away. It's not like they were only getting 18-year-old lottery tickets. They were getting some upper level minor guys who can realistically be a trade piece or can be impact players in the next few years.
Yeah, I think that you're going to walk away from that deadline with it being kind of a bit of an inflection point for the Blue Jays franchise for the next handful of years. Because surely, you bring in what? I think it was 15 or more names. Surely someone in there turns out to be a major league team or a major league player, excuse me, and makes it to the major leagues in some capacity.
Yep, it'll be fun to watch. Did the Blue Jays win the Yusei Kikuchi trade since Kikuchi did not pitch in the playoffs?
I mean, listen, I'm just saying. I don't know.
The Astros did not need pitching help in that series, we'll say.
No, that was not where their downfall was.
They just got out grittied by the gritty Tigs,
The gritty
Tigers,
Tigs.
the gritty Tigers, I
I
guess.
don't even know if it's the Tigs or Tigers.
I'm
I still
assuming
don't
it's
know.
the Tigers because
I don't know. I don't know. Hey, should we? I think we both put our. I know I definitely did, and this is not something we had on our rundown. But do we want to just extremely quickly? Do we want to fly through what is? I mean, obviously the ALDS and the NLDS aren't totally set yet, but do we want to just fly through very, very quickly our picks for the rest of the playoffs?
yep. I already got the Astros Tigers series, so I can drop mine real quick. I'm gonna say Cleveland over Detroit in 4. I don't know if we want to do games or just winners.
Okay. Yeah. We can do games.
All right, Cleveland over Detroit in 4. Yankees over Kansas City in 4. And then I'll do Philadelphia over Milwaukee in 4. I'll go San Diego over the Dodgers in 5.
You just don't believe in the Dodgers, eh?
Well, I
Just
mean,
don't think it's gonna happen.
I just think the Padres are really good. Like they are a
Padres are fun.
very
Padres
deep
are fun.
team. Yeah. And Fernando Tatis is the GOAT. So and then in the NLCS, I go Phillies over Padres in 7, Yankees over Guardians in 6. This postseason has been great for my AL Central heart, which has, seemingly come out the past few years. And then I'll go Phillies over the Yankees in 6 in the World Series.
Just because you can't fathom the thought of the Yankees being in the World Series, I so hope.
Yes. Yeah, of course. You
Yeah.
can't you
Okay.
can't you can't end a streak like that. 2009, like let the 2009 team be that one.
Oh yeah. All right, here we go. Team of Destiny vibes. I'm saying the Tigers over the Guardians. I'll say in 5. And I guess because I've got one upset, I can't pick both upsets. So I guess I'll begrudgingly take the Yankees in
I
5 as
mean,
well.
Ragans and Lugo.
I don't know. I guess we'll see. Then we'll go Brewers over the Mets. I had that in my original bracket, and I still think that the Brewers are the better team. But I do think it will be the Phillies that ultimately take them down, and I think that one will probably be a bit of a bloodbath. I would say probably in 3, maybe in 4. The Brewers look very human. And then I'll say the Dodgers over the Padres in 5. I think that's going to be a classic series.
Yeah.
Then we're looking at the Tigers and the Yankees. Uh, I don't want to see the Yankees win. I'll say Team of Destiny. I'll give the Tigers a run to the World Series, and I'll say it'll be the on the other side of the bracket. I'll say the Dodgers take down the Phillies in 6. And then we get a Dodgers with Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto and the whole billion-dollar band of merry men taking
Wow.
home a World Series in a non-Mickey Mouse fashion in 6 games.
That'll be pretty cool. That would be, seeing Shohei win would be pretty cool.
It would probably be fun. It would
Yeah.
probably be fun. Now, is that what I want to happen? You know, but I think that's probably my pick.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Literally nothing like postseason baseball. So yeah,
Enjoy it while it's here.
Yes, exactly. And hopefully the Blue Jays will be back in October next year. All right, that is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Thanks for sticking with us through some illness, through some coughs, through some sickness. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View Pod. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. The pod is at BEV_pod. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter, and I am at Worden_Zach. Thanks so much for listening.